Let's get started. This is the Speaker Series Spotlight hosted by Southern Management Consulting Club, the first ever. Let's unlock success in a disruptive business landscape with Joshua Fang.
I think that's something that anybody that's looking for a career, whether it's in consulting or any career in general, is going to have to ask themselves. And it's like, why are you doing things? And there's a bunch of different motivators. Obviously, there's money, there's passions, there's, the type of work that you're doing. But I think for myself, there were a couple of different things. I think firstly, I'm a very high level thinker. Like I can think very big picture, but I'm not that type of person to be very nitty gritty and deep in the details, which is why I would be a horrible project manager. Because like if you told me to go be a project manager, I would not be able to pick up a lot of the smaller details. But I love to think very broadly, bringing in a bunch of different information and different pieces of things to kind of formulate an idea or formulate a thought. And so that was like one of the big things that helped me identify strategy consulting as like one of the as the path that I wanted to pursue. The other was going through my internships, and like as I was doing my internships, I love the consulting element of working with people and being in teams and not always just like staring and being an individual contributor like you would be in finance in a lot of cases. I absolutely love the people element of it, and I think that was kind of was like, okay, consulting is the right path. And then once I did my two internships, I was like, okay, I don't really prefer implementation consulting because you work on the very similar projects for a longer period of time. Whereas in strategy consulting, you kind of are able to switch gears. And like, for me, I've been on like 4 or 5 different projects since I've started, and that was like a year ago. Right. And so you get to switch gears pretty quickly. You get to change different industries. You get to try a bunch of different things. And so I think for me, those are kind of some things that push me into strategy consulting. And I think the last thing is for me, like why Accenture is I think Accenture has really been trying to grow their portfolio of work. Accenture traditionally has been very much known as like a tech first company. But one of the things that Accenture is trying to kind of recreate is like this 360-degree value that we deliver. So we don't just deliver on the technology capabilities of the organization. We want to affect every part of the organization, and that's why you're starting to see Accenture develop an end-to-end solution for the work that we do. So we have strategy consultants that come up with a strategy. Then we have consulting analysts that will do the implementation or the build out or the development of whatever solution it is. We also have, our song team, which is our marketing people that will actually come up with your marketing concepts. With people that will focus and do on your all the HR and the talent and organization aspect of your work of your organization, and all the way through to the end. And so we're really trying to build this end-to-end solution at Accenture that really delivers on that 360-degree value promise. And so I think that's something that's really exciting and something that's I think going to really change a lot of how a lot of like organizations are buying consulting work, because they know that, from the beginning to the end, they'll have people and continuity in the ideas that they're generating. And so I think Accenture has been a really good place for that. And it has also allowed me to kind of combine my passions of finance and technology and strategy kind of at the intersection, where I'm able to do things and work on, building out the financial model for the recommendation that we're having and why we're able to do it, and justifying the value of it while still kind of being in tune with technology and up to date with some of the latest and greatest, such as Gen AI, as all you guys are knowing, is kind of the hot topic right now. We've had leading experts come in to explain things like that. So kind of building on those technology things, and then continuing also to work on my strategy skill set of like overarching, high level thinking of how to kind of deploy some of these things into the workforce. So it's been a really fun experience. That was a long-winded way of me saying that I really enjoy the work that I do. But it took a while for me to understand what it is that I wanted. But once I did, it was full steam ahead. For me, a good portion of my work has been in energy, but I've also, as mentioned, worked in utilities. I've worked in financial services. I've worked in insurance. And you have that ability to try different things because of the fact that you are in a development program. So I think there's some pretty cool, I guess, abilities for you to try different things. I think beyond just the industries that you're working in, you get to work in different functions. So every consulting firm groups their organizations very differently. So for example, Accenture has a CEO enterprise strategies, function where you're very high level thinking about, like, for example, mergers and acquisitions, or thinking about, growth strategy or go to market strategy. But then we have our CEO and enterprise value function, or we have our talent and organization, which focuses more on the HR component. So it's not just industries that you're working in that are very varied, but at the same time, it's the functions within the industries that you get to try different things on. And I think one of the great things about Accenture is that, we are a very large organization, and sometimes that gets very intimidating, and it scares you a little bit. But I think the cool thing with Accenture and being able to be in such a large organization is that at the end of the day, there's work in something that you're interested in. I think the first thing that you like challenging is oftentimes you're working with very diverse teams, and these teams can include people from, varying ranks in the organization and seniority. You could be working with an MD that's worked 30 years in that industry, or you could be working with somebody that's only been at consulting for a year, right? And so your teams are very diverse, and I think that's sometimes a very much a challenge. So understanding and truly being able to be yourself and understanding the team that you're working with while on a short-term engagement that could be 2 or 3 months is always something that's a challenge and interesting. But something Accenture really promotes is what we call our truly human kind of playbook. And so at the beginning of each project, we kind of talk about the things that we enjoy, the passions that we have, things that we do outside of our work time. For example, for me, I have some untouchable times where, I go swimming twice a week. I make sure that I'm getting workouts in. Those are times where my colleagues know not to bother me unless there's an absolute emergency and things like that, right? And so I think like by doing that, that really helps out kind of mitigate that challenge of, working in those diverse teams. I think the second challenge that I think I've kind of encountered or been facing is getting to know an industry that you might not have ever touched or know very little of, but ramping up your knowledge on it very fast. And I think one of the key benefits of being in a consulting firm is that oftentimes, like all these consulting firms, and have a very great repertoire of information on the industry that you're working in. Last thing is kind of managing your life and the pace of work. And this is something that I think you'll face in any high demand or like high intensity industry is, how do I balance my work and my life, right? And also making sure that I'm sticking to commitments that I made. And there's been a few times where I've had to, blow off dinner plans because work came up or, couldn't make a round of go. I think there's a couple of skills that I would say every consultant needs. I think the first is kind of tying it back to my first thing, people skills. I think in an industry where you're working with people, whether it's your clients, your own teams, and you're going to be constantly working with people. And if you're not ready for that in consulting, I think that's something you need to develop yourself into and prepare yourself for. Like I said, you work in very diverse teams. And if you're somebody that is able to adapt and kind of be very moldable and work with different people and understand that, people have bad days and people have good days and things like that, I think that'll really help you be successful. When I first started, one of the MDs that kind of talked to me, he was like, Josh, like, we didn't hire you for the consultant you are now. We're hiring you for the consultant that you're going to be. And it's the potential that you have. And if you're not somebody that is continually kind of developing yourself and building your capabilities, learning about different industries, learning about different organizations and businesses and how different things are being built into their, organizations, or, for example, like why a company would acquire another one, what are the synergies you're looking for, or maybe if you're looking at an industry, it's like, okay, what are some of the big trends coming up in oil and gas and things like that. If you're not consistently kind of building up those capabilities, you're going to end up stagnating. And I think that's something that's really important, is continuing to develop yourself. And, we hear all the time from our senior leaders where they're like, you know what, we're still continuing to learn. For example, with things like Gen AI or like blockchain and things like that are relatively new. A lot of these people have never encountered these things, and they're still reading up on it. They're still learning on it to see how these things can change organizations and be kind of catalysts for growth. You have programs that allow you to move to other countries, and work on projects and move there either permanently or on like a transfer and things like that. We have not-for-profit programs. One of the things that I'm really passionate about is something we do called Accenture development programs, where we work with global not-for-profits and build out solutions for them. Like I know one of our consultants was living in Ghana for 6 months, and he was building on a microfinance program for farmers in Ghana. Like those are opportunities that are available to you. And I think if there's something that you really want to do, there truly is that opportunity for you to do it, as long as it is something that you want to do and you really kind of advocate for yourself. I think the last thing about Accenture has been the people, and it sounds very cliche, but I'll give you a couple of examples, and I think this will kind of show you what I mean by that people aspect. The first is, when I was interviewing, I ended up getting a few offers, and I'm not trying to bash any other firms or anything like that. But when I interviewed, the people at Accenture truly were something that kind of excited me, and that's the reason why I ended up picking Accenture Strategy. One of my interviewers, we were going through our case math, and I did my math, and with addition, you could do your addition in any order that you want as long as you get the right answer. And I did my addition a certain way, and the case interviewer was like, no, that's the wrong way of doing it. And I sat there and I was kind of like, hey man, like, as long as you're adding things correctly, you get the right answer. There's no right order of doing addition. And he was adamant that he was correct. And I was like, well, if that's the type of person that I'm working with at that firm, then I don't know if, look later on in a project, if he's A, going to be very micromanaging, or B, if I do things maybe in a different way than he would normally do, if he would kind of just get upset, even though the outcome is either the same or if not better. Right. So those are some things that I picked up on during even my interview. Every time anybody asks, like, what's your day to day? Like, oh, my day to day is never the same, or, it depends. Right. And so I think it's very true. And I hate that I'm giving a very cliche answer because I'd love to give very pointed, direct kind of answers to these things, but at the end of the day, it's so project dependent, it's so team dependent, it's so dependent on your client, right? And so when you're working in a professional service industry, the first thing you have to recognize is that your client comes number one, and how they want to work and operate is going to be critical to how your team operates and works. Mornings usually are spent kind of recapping the work that we've done the night before, catching up on and setting priorities for the rest of the day. Something else that we usually do in the morning is also connect with the client to kind of give them updates on what's going on, see if there's anything that they've uncovered throughout the day, and then kind of moving forward from there. Usually around lunch, obviously we'll grab lunch, and I usually grab lunch with a coworker or somebody to kind of catch up and see if they're on what they're doing on their projects, or potentially even get lunch at least once or twice a week with somebody that's on my team, just to see how they're doing and things like that. Afternoons tend to become a little bit more work heavy because you get all the meetings done with and you get to actually spend some time doing the work. But I usually do that. And then, around 3 or 4 o'clock, I'll have like an end of day catch up with my manager to see, where we're at, and finish off what we have to do for that night, and kind of make sure we're all on the same page. And then after that, the day becomes a little bit more free. And so, there's team building events, there's networking events, there's Accenture, ERG groups, like employee resource groups, so, or what we call plus ones, which are our extracurricular activities. And so I tend to work on those kind of earlier in the evening. Honestly, it's been different in a good way. I think coming into it, I thought, like, with consulting or with finance or any kind of role, you have very little control of your life and you don't really get to do the things you want to do outside of it. And that's kind of been a welcome surprise for me, is how open our team has been to, making sure that you get in the different things that you need. For me, I would say there's two pieces that I would really kind of get you to consider. Is what are you doing to differentiate yourself from someone else potentially? I think that's one area that I would think about. And the reason why is, like, everybody that goes in consulting is a very high performing student or somebody that has a lot of, desire to get in consulting. But what is it that makes you different? And so I think that's one side of things. I think the other side of things is that if you look across the spectrum in consulting, the background of people is very different, right? We have people that come in from MBAs, and their original kind of undergraduate could be in pharmaceuticals, or they could be like teachers. And for example, I've worked with a teacher who ended up going to do an MBA at a top school and then coming in to work with us, right? Like, there's a very wide range of backgrounds. And so I think, instead of thinking about, like, okay, what are things that I can do to get into consulting, I think what are things that you can do to fill in the gaps that you have is a better way of framing things, right? If you're not a strong presenter, then maybe go try to do Toastmasters to make sure that you're elevating that element of your career, right? If you know that you're not an Excel modeler, well, maybe go do like a Wall Street Oasis course, or maybe go Wall Street Prep and doing the Excel modeling course, right? Thinking about what you're lacking and where your potential weaknesses are, rather than saying, like, okay, well, if I do this and follow this person who did this to get into consulting, then I'll be able to get in. I don't think that's necessarily the right kind of framing of the idea. It's more about filling in the gaps that you have, but also B, as I mentioned, kind of looking to, yeah, like, do things that would differentiate yourself and make yourself a bit different than everybody else. I think someone I really admire is Satya Nadella. He's the CEO of Microsoft. If you look into his story, I think it's a very interesting story. But I also think he's one of the greatest, like, in my opinion, CEOs in terms of acquisitions, like if you look at the acquisitions that he's made, they're miles and miles better than what Steve Ballmer did. And it's not a knock on Steve Ballmer, but if you look at some of the things Steve Ballmer did, you know, they tried to create a Microsoft phone and tried to compete with Apple, like the MP3 space and things like that. But if you look at kind of how Satya has been able to allocate, you know, do capital allocation. This is very much of a finance thought of mine, you know, like acquiring things such as LinkedIn or, you know, acquiring Skype to eventually build it into Teams. Being one of the first people to start investing into OpenAI and things like that. I think you start to see that he's a very methodical thinker in how he approaches acquisitions and investments. And I think that's something that I really admire. I also think that if you look into his personal story, he has a strong empathy for people that are struggling with things outside of their career. If you look into Satya, I think one of his kids has a debilitating illness, and that's something that really shines through when you listen to him talk and hear how much he cares about the people that work for him, and not just people that work for him, but people in general. And I think those are all aspects of or things that I would really look at. And the last part of it, I think, is that he's very much understanding of what goes on at the very front lines of his organization. He takes the time to understand that, whereas I feel like, you know, often CEOs, oftentimes as a CEO, you get a big ego and you sit in your big office in your corner suite and with the nice view, and you forget that, you know, the real foundations of your organization come from the people on the very front lines. And I think Satya has been able to do a very good job of that. And if you ever have an opportunity or you have some free time, I would highly recommend listening to a coffee chat that he had with the Stanford Graduate School of Business, so their MBA program. The kind of series is called Views from the Top, and Satya kind of sits down and is interviewed by MBA students, and he talks a lot about different aspects of his leadership, and how he has kind of become the CEO that he's become. And for all those reasons, and probably many more, I think Satya Nadella would be the CEO that I admire the most, or the leader I admire most in tech. Well, thanks for having me, everyone. And yeah, feel free to reach out and connect, and would be happy to chat if you guys have any questions or anything that I can help you out with.
Yeah, be sure to follow us. Follow with us. Just a little bit spoiler alerts. We do have a mentorship program with Accenture coming up, and also maybe partnership with EY Parthenon, maybe. So keep your eyes on our social media page.